Okay, we are live. Welcome back to the Ink Live. I'm Anand Girdhardas. Very happy to have two special guests today, one after the other, talking politics. First, joining me now, Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut. He will be known to some of you. He's best known for his long service in the House Intelligence Committee, where he's a top Democrat, and his time as the chair of the centrist, center-left New Democrat coalition in the House. And he's been a big voice against Trump's dismantling of federal law enforcement and national security institutions. So, Congressman, we're glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Anand.
Um, by the way, I was just asking you off camera. You said this is not your first Substack Live, so I'm glad that Substack Live is now getting enough traction that people are. We a few weeks ago everybody was doing their first one, but now
Yeah.
it has a little maturity. So the other day at the Politico Security Summit. Uh, and for folks who don't know you, you're not a big fan of President Trump. You're much more frequently a big critic. Um, but you said about the president's Middle East trip and some of these foreign policy moves that are happening right now. You said, I'm not in the habit of praising this president, but I got to give him some kudos there. Uh, what did you mean?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's worth stepping back here, right? Because I think I'm one of the president's more vocal critics in the realm of his, completely unconstitutional behavior. When he's calling for the impeachment of judges or suggesting that he may not follow judicial rulings or, taking congressional power, the power of the purse. I mean, yeah, I'm really consistently aggressive. And obviously, he's a Republican. I'm a Democrat. So we have fundamental ideology differences. But in this realm of foreign policy, and I get some blowback for saying this, but I mean, let's just look at the week that catalyzed my statement that he had a reasonably good week in the Middle East, right? Basically, in the space of a week, he stopped just dumping munitions on Yemen, which were really having very limited effect. I think he pushed back, and sort of this implicit snub of Prime Minister Netanyahu by not going to Israel when he visited a bunch of Middle Eastern countries is sending the signal to Netanyahu that we're not going to do everything that the prime minister asks, including most concerningly, either assisting or participating or even green lighting an attack on Iran, which would be a very destabilizing thing, and the opening to Syria. I mean, the president could have played that the other way and just said this guy al-Shara is a former al-Qaeda operative, and we're going to shut it down. Instead, he opened up at least the possibility and the hope that Syria may, because of the lifting of sanctions, may succeed. And look, all of those things I think were wise things to do.
And I wonder why you think it works that way sometimes, because I've heard so many people who have met President Trump in person, journalists who've interviewed him in the Oval Office say, there's this kind of difference between the person we know in the world, in the media, in speeches, and the kind of what a friend of mine calls the golf concierge up close. But foreign policy is this funny world where it is a relationships based thing, and because Trump in a way doesn't understand huge things in the world, but like can like that guy or talk to this guy. I wonder if you think that explains something like the Syria opening, which ideologically makes no sense for someone as strident as Trump, but he sort of has this faith in his ability to like charm people. And I wonder if that in this limited series of cases can be built on.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't think Donald Trump is that complicated a guy, right? I mean, I think he regards the world and mind you, I'm not endorsing his foreign policy across the board. I mean, I think the moment when he humiliated President Zelensky in the Oval Office, assisted by his, hand puppet JD Vance, was a brutal moment that we're not going
One
to
of the
wipe that stain.
lowest
Oh,
moments in memory.
I mean, we're not going to wipe that stain off our nation's history anytime soon. Or then following that up with voting, with North Korea and Russia and the United Nations over, who precisely was the aggressor in Ukraine. So believe me, I'm not endorsing his broader foreign policy, but I think there's some core things with Donald Trump. Tariffs is one of them. I mean, this is a transactional guy. He really believes tariffs. The whole immigration catastrophe, I think, is somewhat religious for him. And here's where I give him a little bit of credit. I think the man is allergic to war. to the United States being in war. And you can call that traditional isolationism or whatever you want, but that combined with his regarding of himself as a real deal maker, I think that opens the doors to things like trying not to go to war with Iran, trying, though I don't think he's done it right, to bring about a peace agreement in Ukraine, and you know. Let's go back to Trump one. I know that there were people in the White House who were hell bent on getting the United States into a war with Iran. Now, setting aside whether a war with Iran is a good or a bad idea, that's something that you don't do without a lot of consideration. And people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton were hell bent on getting the United States into a war with Iran. As it happens, of course, we don't need to spend a lot of time on whether we have been particularly successful in the last couple of decades with the wars that we have fought in the Middle East. But anyway, my point is that he does seem to have this weird deal making in combination with an allergy to kinetic conflict that if you subscribe to the idea that I do, that our mistakes in foreign policy over my lifetime have largely been about a reliance on military force to try to nation build, hey, let's take it.
Um, I want to ask you in your role in terms of overseeing the intelligence community. One thing that's always struck me over the years as a journalist is that the intelligence community of the United States, for all of the problems it has, is often very clear-eyed about risks to the country faces. For example, climate change was talking about that,
You seem to be.
before lots of people were talking about it. Um, you obviously get to see intelligence that the rest of us don't see. We're not asking you to leak it here, but I wonder, when you read and talk to folks in the American intelligence community who are thinking about the long range position of the United States, how is the damage Trump is doing? How are the tariffs, the chaos, the unconstitutional actions? How are how are our intelligence community processing the kind of long range change in the standing of the United States, the security of the United States? Do you see evidence based on what you see that we don't, that the security and standing of the United States is compromised even more than the rest of us might realize it over time?
Yeah, it's a good question, and first of all, it's really important to understand what the intelligence community does, right? Sometimes people think that they're like a council on foreign relations with guns, right? They're not really about evaluating, the geostrategic standing of the United States. They're really about trying to come up with estimates or assessments on what President Petro of Colombia may do if we are more aggressive on counter narcotics or more militarily inclined things. How capable is the Chinese Navy, for example? So they tend to be tactical in their focus, and they're pretty good at that too. The intelligence community is frequently criticized because they didn't predict the downfall of the Soviet Union, or big macro, again, Council on Foreign Relations kind of stuff, Brookings kind of stuff. That's not really what they do. But what they do, and here I'll be a little careful not to cross any lines, they might come up with an assessment about whether Putin or Xi in China uh, is thinking about taking advantage of internal chaos in the United States. And you don't have to be a genius to know that I name those two in particular, Russia and China, who have a profound stake in the failure of liberal democracy and free market capitalism, are pretty excited about things that happen that they can show the world as evidence that our system doesn't work. January 6, 2021 being the classic example. That was the gift that we'll keep on giving to despotic regimes for a generation. And so the intelligence community does sort of think about how foreign leaders, particularly antagonistic ones, may look to take advantage of or use for propaganda purposes the internal turmoil that we are demonstrating.
So if you and I were just friends in a friend group, we're normal, good friends, and then I start to notice that you might be under the influence of some very malign act. I don't know, but I suspect it. I might reconsider what I share with you, what I tell you, right? Have you seen any evidence that our allies uh, around the world have shifted their willingness to share certain things with the United States because of concerns about who President Trump is under the influence of?
Um, so you asked about evidence. No, I haven't seen evidence. I'm not sure that I would, right? Because it's sort of hard to prove a negative. Like, is there some very sensitive report that the British have on a, that relies on a human intelligence asset in Damascus, that we never saw? That's a little hard to imagine seeing. However, look, I know that the people who make up MI6 and the various, Five Eyes intelligence services, they are people. And they watch Donald Trump put classified information up on Twitter. They know the story, and quite frankly, here of yes, classified information retained at Mar-a-Lago, also retained in Joe Biden's garage in Delaware. And so, yes, there is nervousness and anxiety. I think much more heightened when you look at a U.S. president, or quite frankly, a director of national intelligence who right now is acting enormously politically, saying, will we give our most sensitive, meaning if it gets blown, people die, information. I haven't seen evidence, but these are people, right? So, of course, in their minds, they're saying, has the risk increased? And it's sort of hard to conclude that it hasn't.
You were one of the early people to call for President Biden to drop out of the race in 2024. Now, this is the big topic in Washington. I think that the big Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson book comes out today. Um, it's very controversial. It's controversial whether we should even be, focusing on uh, someone who isn't in office when someone who is doing all the damage he is. Whether we should be focusing on, you know, uh, what these authors call a cover up when you have the president so frontally right now destroying American institutions. But I do think a lot of people who feel like there is an overall problem with trust in American life, who feel like, frankly, trust in our officials and institutions is not sadly a single party issue. Think it is a relevant discussion, even if it's not a convenient one. Curious, do you feel vindicated by this discussion, given your earlier the fact that you were kind of early to call for that? And how do you reckon with kind of wanting to have a truthful discussion of how your party works, how decisions are made, how sacred cows are dealt with? Versus the very real stakes of this time and it not being frankly a convenient time for this discussion.
Yeah, look, I guess this is not about me. I mean, when I watched that debate and I reflected on the very limited contact I'd had with President Biden, I just thought, for me, that wasn't about the campaign. I mean, I had profound concerns about whether he could win the campaign after the debate. But behind a successful election, if there had been one, is another 4 years, right? And the presidency of the United States is probably the most demanding job in the world. It is not an 8 hour a day job. It's not a 10 hour a day job. It is a 24 hour a day job. So that's why I was first, relatively maybe first, soon out of the box on the issue. Look, the other thing I think is that it just appalls me that the Republicans want, I heard one, Scott Jennings on CNN called this the biggest fraud committed on the American people in the history of the Republic. I mean, come on, give me a break. First of all, it's not, I think, and I don't know, but, President Biden was doing the job. There was precisely zero stories about him making a decision or failing to make a decision that somehow hurt the Republic. Secondly, Scott Jennings, what about your guy? Because I don't hear a lot of Republicans today saying, gosh, it's a bad idea to take a $400 million jet from Qatar, or gosh, it's a bad idea to call for the impeachment of federal judges because you don't like their rulings. So as far as I'm concerned, the Republicans have zero standing to be criticizing the Democrats on Joe Biden. But I do think, and this is maybe the most important thing about it, is yeah, you know what? We should reflect. We should reflect. And in particular, the people who are very close to President Biden. And look, you love the man, so you're going to have a bias, but you got to be more ruthless in your assessment about, whether the most important job on the planet should go to a guy who is clearly slowing down. And, again, people should reflect on that. And then, yeah, I do think that the party, because let's be honest about this, I saw it, and there are a lot of people who have a lot more access or had a lot more access to President Biden than I did, more senior senators, et cetera. If what we're talking about here is of profound importance to the Republic, do you really want to close ranks on this issue? Look, in politics, you close ranks a lot. Loyalty is a big deal, but it shouldn't be automatic. And when the stakes are as high as they are, Is it necessarily a good idea? That's something that I think we should think about. But quite frankly, the Republicans who are going out of their way to justify every insane emanation from Donald Trump, I think they should sit this particular conversation out.
The next question was inspired by literally seeing a few minutes ago. Marianne Williamson joined our stream to watching. Do you think it was wrong in retrospect not to have and force a primary in 2024, Democratic primary?
The only right answer in retrospect, the only right answer was for President Biden to have abided by that commitment he sort of made to be a bridge president, a bridge to a new generation. Once he changed his mind on that and received almost unquestioning support from the people around him and the people in the party, there were no good options. And I mean, it was enormously delicate because I remember thinking in July or August of shortly after the debate, I remember thinking as I considered calling for President Biden to step aside from the campaign, now what? And you asked the question, should there have been a mini primary or forced? On the reality of the situation, and I remember this, and I was in the room with an awful lot of people who were thinking about that, it would have been almost inconceivable for the Democratic Party in August of 2024 to say to the clear inheritor who is a black woman that, sorry, you now need to compete again in a weird accelerated primary. That I think my,
I
my
mentioned there had been a
analysis is that
primary
that wouldn't
in
have
in 20,
flown.
I mentioned there had been a primary, like a normal primary that the President Biden competed in like the spring of 2024.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that would have been, that's what you do. That's what a party does. And there would have been no criticism of that. But to inject in August, 5 months before the election, a jury rigged primary, which would have been probably legitimately thought about an effort to remove the vice president from the role of nominee, the political equities involved there would have been radioactive. And I'm not sure it could have been done without brutally splitting the party.
I want to ask you about you've been a leader in this new Democrat coalition, more of the kind of centrist, moderate, wing of your party. Um, and there's this kind of big debate that we have been having, not having, but kind of hosting with lots of people uh, over the past couple of years now, I would say, which is what is the best counter offer to populist authoritarianism on the right? And this is a discussion that's happening around the world. And there's a lot of interesting, different. I'll summarize the kind of debate as there are some who say when your right wing party in your country is going crazy and is going wild and is detaching from reality and is doing crazy unlawful things every day, that you should just try to be normal and like not do too much. And simply being normal and not doing too much is the best defining contrast. Uh, there are others who say, we talked to Abdul Al Sayed, who's running for Senate in Michigan, who say you can't beat something with nothing. And these authoritarian rightist movements have a lot of ideas. They're often terrible ideas, but they have ideas. And that's precisely the moment to offer really big, thrilling, galvanizing things. Offer healthcare for everyone in a big way. Offer, a different, a kind of progressive approach on taxation. Obviously, you have your lane. Do you think there's truth in the progressive critique to folks on your left? The progressive critique that moderation, that kind of sensible incrementalism is simply not exciting enough to defeat populist authoritarianism.
Yeah, yeah, and first of all, I mean, let's be clear. I'm not going to, as somebody who's sort of perceived as pragmatic and maybe moderate, I'm not going to at all own the notion that the right answer here is to just hang back and do nothing. That's crazy. That's crazy. This pragmatist would say you need to do two things to defeat populism, right? Number one, you got to hand it to Trump. He diagnoses correctly because he told America that the system is rigged against you and the institutions aren't working to your benefit. He's not wrong about that. And that's true in a lot of different realms, particularly the economic realm, where we see economic or wealth concentration in this country that is unprecedented. He's not wrong. Now, he's got a set of terrible, terrible solutions. In fact, he doesn't really have any solutions, or in as much as he does, they actually make that problem worse. So I think you need to do two things to counter populism. Number one, and you're hearing this from a moderate pragmatist, you need to actually have a vision that says, here's how we're going to actually build stuff. Now, we can go into abundance if you like, but one of the reasons I think we are hated right now is because we said to the American people, we passed the IRA and we're going to lower the cost of 10 drugs for you in 5 years. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, the biggest investment ever in since the Eisenhower investment in our highways. And oh, by the way, you might see bridges built 9 years from now. So, number one, we need to describe and actually build a government that affects people's lives for the better. And we failed at that. Full stop, we failed. And again, that opens the door to how do you fix that? And then, secondarily, and I think this is a little bit more complicated, the really ugly part of populism is the nativism, the racism, the bigotry. Your problems are a result of people whose skin color is browner than yours, which is sort of the core cultural message of MAGA and of so many populist movements. That's a little more complicated. You sort of need to figure out how to shift people, towards the better angels of their nature. But look, to wrap this all up in a bow, Anand, to me, the winning combination as a matter of policy is to lean left economically. I agree with the progressives on that. Absolutely. Now, by the way, they probably have ideas that I don't agree with. But yeah, make healthcare, fix this god awful healthcare system we have, make education more affordable, build the housing so that the rents come down,
Are,
do
are,
all
are
that
there
stuff.
are there two or three areas there, just as examples of that, where you now would be for something you weren't for a few years ago in a more progressive left leaning direction?
Absolutely, absolutely. And let me tell you this: 14 years ago, I was deeply skeptical of single-payer healthcare, and I'm going to own that. But I'm also going to say so was America, right? I mean, it was an idea whose time had not yet come, and we know that because the public option. I was here for it. The public option did not survive the Affordable Care Act. Now, I was comfortable with the public option, but 14 years ago, I was not comfortable with single payer healthcare. Since then, I have seen the disaster that is this healthcare system, the complete failure to deliver for anything other than, let's just say, the top quarter of Americans in terms of, availability and affordability of healthcare. And I say, you know what? Medicare works pretty darn well. And I think that today I'd want to talk about how it would work and everything else. But single payer healthcare is probably an example of something that the Overton window shifted, and I'm a lot more comfortable with it than I was 2 decades ago.
You're a Medicare for all guy now?
Well, like I said, I would want to be able to make sure we were describing this with precision. Why do I say that? Is it because I'm trying to shilly-shally here? No, it's because no topic, I was here for the Affordable Care Act fight, is more personal and more explosive for Americans than their health care. So yeah, Medicare works great. And the insurance companies and anyway, I could certainly get there. The other one, by the way, that I think is huge, and this is a frustrating one because we don't have a lot of levers here in Washington, but cranking the supply of housing. I was the chairman of the economic disparity committee that Pelosi put together 4 or 6 years ago, and I walked away with the conclusion that two things we could do to really address economic disparity in a systemic way would be to build a hell of a lot of housing to force those costs down, and to provide subsidized childcare so that every parent had access to high quality subsidized childcare. I think if you do those two things, you have a massive effect on the economic disparity that affects this country.
Last thing before I let you go, and then we're going to bring on Ross Barkan for our second conversation. Um, we have a new book club at the Ink Book Club, and Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson was our first selection, precisely because it's worth being argued over. And one of the things that really struck me reading it, and then some of our conversations with our subscribers, is um, it's not just a policy shift I think they're calling for, but a cultural shift. And I observed reading it that if I think about times in recent years when I was in a big gathering of progressives or Democrats or however you want to define it, um, it's more just like it's not building stuff is not necessarily what is of interest to people. It's not that people are necessarily even against it. It's just not the thing that people are talking about, right? And I wonder if you could reflect on the kind of cultural obstacle within the kind of broad left of thinking about an abundance agenda instead of a justice only agenda?
Yeah, well, first of all, those two things shouldn't be put in opposition.
Right.
If you actually and I take your point that like nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "I hope America builds more today." But people do wake up in the morning and say, "I can't afford my housing any longer." And what's the solution to that? Build more housing. People do wake up in the morning and say, "I can't believe I have to spend an hour in traffic on 95 South in Stanford today." The solution to that is building more bridges and building better transportation and mass transit, right? So, you know, building stuff lies underneath the actual visceral feelings that people have. And look, at some point, there should be no argument, right? So there should be no argument around the notion that is sort of critical to the abundance theory, which is that the party that says that government can make your life better should not pass an IRA and follow that up with building precisely zero electric chargers in Connecticut, which was my experience. The party that says we're going to actually uplift you economically shouldn't also be the party that is defending the zoning regulations that prevent you from building housing. Now, I understand that we're going to have a big argument about both the diagnosis of our failure to build stuff in this country as well as the solutions. So on the left, you hear stuff, for example, well, the problem is actually more about corporate power. Now, I don't see evidence of that. It's private equity buying up single family homes. Look, I'm a humble guy intellectually. So if you can show me the evidence and persuade me of that fact, then I'm interested in the solution. But you know, in his book, as you know, Ezra Klein and Thompson give example after example after example of very progressive states that have been completely incapable of delivering things like high-speed rail. And high-speed rail did not get built in California because of corporations or private equity. It got not built because we just put this incredibly Byzantine structure around actually completing projects that I do think we need to revisit. But again, I think it's really important. You're right. Building things is not necessarily what people think of first, but it's underneath so much of what I think does plague, too many Americans.
Congressman Jim Himes, thank you so much for joining us, and come back and see us in a few months.
Thanks a lot, Alan.
All
Enjoyed being
right,
with you.
thank you. And everyone, stay tuned. We now have a great guest in Ross Barkan, a great journalist, but also not just a political journalist, although that's what he's known for, but someone who's making a really interesting dent in the literary space and knows a lot about New York, knows a lot about the mayor's race here. So I'm very excited to be bringing on Ross Barkan in a second, while we just get this technology happening and I charge my phone. That was a really interesting conversation. Very interesting to hear someone who's a member of the New Democrats, talk about Medicare for all. Really interesting to see the shifting winds in the Democratic Party, and I thought the discussion about Biden was quite interesting. Also, all right, we're waiting for Ross Barkan. Share your thoughts in the chat. What were your reflections on the first interview? I want to know what you think. And as always, while we're waiting for Ross to come on, if you want to get the ink regularly and you're just somehow tuned into this live, press this button to subscribe. Become a supporting subscriber if you like what we do. And let's see if we have Ross coming in. Tell me your thoughts in the chat. Meanwhile, what did you make? What did you make of the congressman? What do you make of a centrist Democrat talking about Medicare for all? What did you make of the notion that there should have been a primary in 2024, a proper primary in the spring, although the congressman said not in August. Okay, let me see. We're having a tough time bringing on Ross. Let me see if we try one more time. Just bear with us while we do that, but pay attention to others' voices in the chat. Troubleshoot this. Jay Davis says shows the impact Bernie has had, which I think is true. The fact that, I mean, it's interesting that we always talk about this progressive moderate split, but I do think it is in a more interesting mixed up place than we realize. Biden adopting a lot of the progressives' ideas. The Biden Bernie tag team that happened. I think some of that changed the lines in ways that we don't think about yet or haven't processed yet. People talk about AOC as this very far out, far left person, but I think that is missing the connection that she actually has on this fighting oligarchy tour. I think she's reaching lots of normie people who probably perceive her as more just like a fighter for people like them and don't care about where she is on a spectrum. Anyway, I think the lines are scrambled these days in ways that our journalists don't sometimes quite get. All right. Ross is struggling to join. We're going to try one more time. Keep giving your thoughts in the chat. Okay, what do we have here? Look, I see there's a question about what's the purpose of going over Biden's mental state. I mean, I'm not clear, whether these things should be. I don't think it should be emphasized. I don't think it's a huge discussion given what's happening to the country. But I will say, uh, as a journalist and as someone who just tries to be intellectually honest, I'm not in the business of saying, certain subjects are undiscussable. I think generally I've learned when you make certain subjects sacred and undiscussable, it makes those issues worse and it fuels conspiracy theories and whatever. Like everything's discussable. The question is how you discuss it, what proportion you discuss it in, how you put it, but I don't think the Biden issue is like, should we relitigate whether we should have run? This is a country, I will tell you from my reporting, that has a giant problem of like 90% of people not trusting uh, the people who run this country, the institutions, the kind of power elite who runs this country, the people who employ them. Like no one is trusted. Um, and so the only part of the Biden story that I think is quite important is to the extent that it is part of a story of even the relatively good people, the thoughtful people, the evidence-based people participating in behaviors that reduce trust further. Uh, that's a problem. That's a problem. And I don't think you can, I don't think you can confine your naming of those problems to like what the effects will be. You don't know what the effects will be. You don't know what the effects will be of discussing something. All right, we're gonna try one more time with Ross, and if not, we'll have to do it another time. Okay, great. If we don't discuss and evaluate, we don't learn. I agree with Kat. Um, how are Americans going to learn about the details of the bad budget bill since it's not getting adequate media coverage and scrutiny? That's a really good question, and it should be. I think some of these things are so big. I mean, the American federal budget's so big, doing so many different things that it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. Um, and I really hope that. Hold on, there we go. I really do hope there's more coverage. I want to have more coverage ourselves. Um, let me see. In the meanwhile, we might have. I'm gonna try another special guest while we're waiting for Ross to turn up. I'm sorry. This is proving a little difficult, but here we go. Staying in the past is the trauma response. Need to acknowledge it and grow from it, but by all means move on. I also think like I don't know. I'm not in a cult, and I don't know if you want to be either. Oh, look, we got a special guest. Michael, the great Michael Cohen.
Anand, how are you, buddy?
Spontaneous. We are having some tech issues right now with my regularly scheduled guests, and I saw you pop on, and I thought you might just want to say hello.
I do. I'm blown away. It's like I'm so disappointed with what's going on, especially with the media. Can we focus on that because you are somebody that spends, like myself, an enormous amount of time trying to educate the public. You do it by going on television. You do it by in your own Substack. You do it on your ink. You do it. I mean, you are a prolific. educator, so to speak, using media. Nobody's asking Trump or this administration the proper follow-up questions, right? They're so afraid. And I understand the fear because look at what, for example, that this administration is doing right now to ABC, to CBS, right? Where they're all capitulating. Oh, yeah, we don't want to get thrown off Air Force One. We don't want to not be, allowed into the Oval Office or into the briefing room. And so we're not going to ask the follow-up questions. We're going to turn around and capitulate to whatever it is that you want to say. They are feeding the American people misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation.
Well, okay, so give me, what do you think are the three most important follow-up questions that the press should be asking Trump right now? Three most important ones.
Sure. So let's talk about tariffs. Right? Because as they'll always say, it's the economy, stupid. Ask him if you can, explain to us how you think that tariffs are going to be paid by the countries of origin when you are right now acknowledging that you are speaking to the CEOs, for example, of Walmart or Costco or Bed Bath & Beyond or whatever, and telling them that they should not be raising their prices. Why would they raise their prices at all if, in fact, the tariffs are going to be borne by the country of origin? It just doesn't seem logical.
Right,
Hold
tariffs.
his feet to the fire.
Okay, second area. What's your second area?
The deportations, the disappearance of the migrants, as an example. They need to do follow-ups. What actual acts are you taking right now, for example, within which to bring back Kilmar Abrego Garcia, as directed by the courts? Ask them.
All right, good one. Number three.
You constantly talk about you're not going to touch. No, let me change that one because I could do these all day long. Every issue, every topic, right? I would like to talk to him about the Golden Dome. And as I wrote in my Substack the other day, I'm not referring to that radioactive pelt on his head. I'm talking about this fence that they want to install over the United States to prevent, say Russia, China, North Korea, or anybody from a nuclear attack on our homeland. Does he not understand that if in fact these countries send up nukes and they end up being disarmed, blown up in flight, that the radioactive, the nuclear fallout, based upon the number of nuclear warheads that exist right now on planet Earth, would wipe out humanity in and of itself? It doesn't actually have to hit the ground in order to be destructive to humanity. In fact, it doesn't even have to hit over the United States, because all the oxygen on this planet ultimately circulates based upon the gravitational spin. Somebody needs to explain to him that with the number of nuclear warheads right now on planet Earth, that mutually assured destruction, if they all go off, would crack the Earth in half, or it would pollute our environment that nothing could possibly live. So tell me, please, what's the point of a $500 billion investment into something that you will never use when that money can actually go to fund every single program that they're cutting? SNAPs, education, pre-K, it would go for fixing every tunnel, bridge, road in America, and so on. Why in the world do you think that the Golden Dome is some sort of panacea to creating world peace?
I want to try to bring in now Ross Barkan, and I actually want Ross to run by um, his theory that he has of you, not of you, sorry, of Trump, and I wanted you to react to it if we can get him on. Um, his theory has to do with uh, the idea, what he called the twilight of MAGA. That he actually looks at Trump right now and sees, excuse me, I was fixing this, sees a whole lot of losing, and not a lot of people are framing it that way, but he sees this kind of weakness that doesn't meet the eye, and I wanted him to share that with us, and then get you to react to it. But
Sure.
while we're still waiting for him, what do you make of the notion that looking at Trump right now, he actually might be weaker than meets the eye?
So I hate to say it, I don't agree with that at all. In fact, it's one of the reasons why in all of my Substacks or in all of these lives that I do, I constantly remind people the whole purpose of asking everybody to join this community. It's so that we are so big, so unstoppable as a community that we cannot, under any circumstances, give them any opportunity. You know, in martial arts, in fighting, which I've done plenty in my lifetime, when you have your opponent on the ropes, you don't take a step back. You take 2 steps in. You cut off the space and you knock them on their ass. You put them
Okay.
down for the count. That way you don't leave it in the hands of the judges. Because look at what happened in 2025. We left it in the hands of the judges, the people, and they bought into his bullshit and they accepted the lies. He could fix Russia-Ukraine war in 24 hours. He'll have the hostages back in 24 hours. Israel-Hamas will be over in 24 hours. You know, we're going to own Greenland. We're going to get Canada to become our 51st state. We're taking over the Panama Canal. You know, all of these promises, yeah, they sound tough, but he's taking steps backwards, not steps forward.
Okay,
But we
so
have
I
to
want
make
to I want
sure
to
we
pause you,
take the
Michael. We
step.
have we have Ross Barkan now joined
Hey,
us. We've had
Ross.
some tech issues. Ross
Hi.
is here. You guys know each other, I imagine.
I
No,
know
but we
of
do
Michael
now.
Cohen. Maybe we do now.
Yeah. Well, great, great. You finally joined, Ross. And Michael stepped in. Just saw him hanging around. So this is a great Substack live moment. But Ross, we have a bunch of stuff to get to. But before Michael leaves us, I wanted you, Ross, to tell us your kind of thesis of your recent piece, "The Twilight of MAGA," and the notion that Trump right now might be kind of weaker than he seems, and might be more over the hill politically than he seems. Because no one feels that way. Everyone feels like they're
Yeah,
like 1% of the way into a very terrible workout or something. Um,
yeah.
eh, I'd love you to just kind of lay out that thesis and then get Michael to kind of react to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say first off, Trump is president of the United States and he's president for the next, three years and change. So there's a lot he can do and a lot of damage he can do, and Republicans will have full control of Congress, I think, through next year. So I don't want to undersell his ability as the executive to do things and to do damage. At the same time, I think politically, he probably has peaked. I think that the peak of Trump sort of as a popular political figure was right before his inauguration. There was actually a striking amount of goodwill that he was bringing into this into this new administration. There are a lot of various pundits and regular voters too who are willing to give Trump 2.0 something of a shot. And he had a very strong victory in 2024. And he had a very strong hand to play, and I would argue that he is slowly squandering it. Now, he is accomplishing promises he set out during the campaign. He's also seen his approval rating slide something close to 10 points in a remarkably short period of time. I think this bill that's coming through Congress, if it really does damage the Medicaid and other social safety net programs, it's going to be politically terrible. Beyond the fact that I think it'll be objectively bad on the merits, it's going to be very bad politics. And the Democrats were very, listless and lacking a message. Trump doing this kind of damage gives them a message. I mean, they have a very, I think, plausible platform for 2026. I also just think there's there's a sort of, because Trump has been successful, people think of him as a Svengali and he can sort of do no wrong politically. But I mean, if he were a wiser president or politician, there are a lot of actions he would have taken to not so quickly erode his popularity. I mean, look at Doge, right? There's nothing masterful about Doge. It's runaway libertarianism done in a very slapdash manner, right? Bill Clinton shrunk the government too. He actually shrunk it quite a bit, but he's a smarter politician, so he did it over time and gradually eroded it. And he gutted the social safety net, but he did it through legislation, and he knew how to package things. And Trump is not that way. So instead, you've got Musk, who's like a deeply polarizing figure, running roughshod over the government. This stuff is hated by most Americans. I think the sheen is off MAGA. I think if Trump had to run an election today, and that's not how our system works, I don't think he'd do that well. I think people are over it generally. I think his big strength was with independents and with sort of low propensity voters. He's very good at bringing those types of voters to the polls to buy into what he wants. Young men, young people of color as well. And my sense in general is not that these people love Democrats now, no, but the Republicans are going to have a rough time in the next elections they have to run it. Now, that's still a while, right? But I do think the House is going to flip. And looking ahead to 28, I would not want to be J.D. Vance right now, put it that way, running on 4 years of Donald Trump against any Democrat. And I don't think Vance has the talent Trump has. I think Vance is going to struggle to keep the Trump coalition together. I mean, something I've been looking very far ahead towards what does MAGA look like after Trump, because there will be an after Trump. He's entering his 80s. That's life. Even if he wants to be a dictator, there will be an after Trump. So there's no real successor. And that's going to be a lot bloodier than I think the MAGAs want to think it is. I think right now they're still sort of feeling the rush and the high of their guy in the White House. But realistically, there's no one right now who can carry it forward as effectively as Trump. His children can't. I think Don is trying, but Don Jr. is not Donald. And Donald knows that. I'm sure Michael could speak to that. I mean, you read about their relationship. I think Jr. is always trying to prove himself, but, he's not the father. Eric's not it. I don't think JD is it. And, we'll see. So that's kind of why I feel politically this project is at its peak and has nowhere to go but down. Now, in the down period, bad things can happen. So I'm not here sitting saying things are going to be good. I'm merely saying it's a lot of Trump. It's been a decade, right? If he somehow stole the nomination illegally in 2028, he'd be a 4-time Republican nominee. I don't see how illegal Donald Trump wins that election, honestly. But, crazier things have happened, as we know. So that's kind of like the very basic.
Thank you. So, Michael, I want you to react to that. But in the chaos of all the tech, I didn't properly introduce Ross. Novelist, journalist, writes, makes up things, but also captures things as they are very well. His Substack is called Political Currents. You should subscribe. This button, you can subscribe. But he's also the editor-in-chief of a new literary magazine based on Substack called the Metropolitan Review, which is super interesting, and we're going to get into all of that. But Michael, before I let you go, I would love you to just react to what you just heard. I felt like my blood pressure going down slightly as Ross was talking. I don't know if it's wishful blood pressure reduction.
So that's the whole problem, Anand, right? And Ross, while I agree with what Ross is saying, it's all in the hypothetical, right? If tomorrow there was an election, Trump wouldn't do better. Who gives a shit, right? There is no election tomorrow. The election is going to be in another 16 months, the midterms. And you're right, there's a ton of damage that not only can they do, but there's a ton of damage that they are doing, including ongoing and continuous violations of our constitutional rights of due process. When you have people like Stephen Miller talking about ridding our system of habeas corpus petitions. I mean, we need to live in the present, in the here and now, and not with innuendo or hypotheticals, but in facts and reality. Every single day, this administration, guided by the Heritage Foundation, are following Project 2025, something I warned of going back years. He doesn't want to do the homework. He doesn't want to put in the hard work. He's willing to take their executive orders, slap it onto a yellow piece of paper, right? Leave a big, gigantic X line there for him to put his signature on and run with it. When you start talking about people like the mayor of Newark, when you talk about the congresswoman from New Jersey, when you talk about Chicago, right? And you start to see the violations of First Amendment. I lived it. And so I'm talking from experience, not from a hypothetical scenario, but reality. They have no problem with violating your rights as a journalist. We've seen it, not just journalists. We've seen that what they're doing now to like ABC and CBS. We see what they're doing to law firms that go into different directions that don't like his specific policies and that they want to challenge them in a legal manner. He doesn't want to be challenged. And it's why I say to everybody that's with us, it is so imperative that you join this community. Join all of our communities, Anand's, Ross's, mine. Join everybody's. Why? So that we build a community that is so big, so loud, so vocal, that come time in 2026, that it's not just a win and not a hypothetical win. It is an ass-kicking of astronomical proportion, where finally we can start to see Democrats reclaim the gavel, so we don't have to look at the people like Marjorie Toilet Green sitting there banging the gavel, demanding decorum, right? While Lauren Boebert is giving some guy a hand job, right, in the third row. This is bullshit, all right? What we need to do is we need to care about truth as a community, and not a community of 1,500. I'm talking about 1.4 million, 10 million people. When we turn around and we say, we're all going to meet you on the Great Lawn, 10 million people show up wearing sky blue t-shirts. That way, that is the only way that we're going to be able to reclaim our democratic republic. Because unfortunately, we thought, as Democrats, we thought that this election was going to go differently, didn't we? Right? When you have the likes of somebody talking about rewriting the Constitution, about getting rid of our tripartite system of government, of stripping the legislative branch and the judiciary of their co-equal powers under the Constitution. And we're watching as they're doing it. It's not like he's not doing these destructive things. He is. And we
But I think
thought
putting
this
your
was
2
going
points
to
together,
be a massive, massive landslide for Kamala Harris. But you know what we learned? We learned that America is more racist than what we thought and more misogynistic than we thought. That there was no way that there's a group of people that are going to vote for a black woman. Not a chance in the world. So
I think she's a bad candidate. I don't agree with that. I think she's a lousy candidate. A lot of their Dems could have beaten Trump.
Michael,
worse than Trump as a candidate?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, less talented. Yeah, she's not talented. Never won a competitive election except in San Francisco. Yeah, she's not good. Never won a primary. Wasn't a good candidate. Dems blew it. Biden blew it. Yeah, could have won that election.
By the way, I'm not going to say she's a great candidate, but at least she told the truth. At least she told the truth.
Yeah, Trump's a liar. I'm not talking about political talent. I think Trump's a total liar and a bad guy. I'm just saying he's politically talented. He's clearly,
yes, he is.
He's won. You know that. I was saying Harris never should have never been vice president. It was an awful pick by Biden. Biden should not have run again. There should have been an open primary. Someone normal and talented should have won, like Pritzker or Whitmer, or take your pick. And you would have had a very standard election with a battle-tested Democratic nominee going up against Trump for the third time. I think that battle-tested Democratic nominee could have found a way forward, but Biden blew it for the Democrats. And Harris, tough position for her. I understand coming in July to be the nominee, but it should not have been her. She wasn't up for it. I think we saw that. And Trump's benefited from weak opponents too. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Trump's not a world historical genius. He beat Hillary Clinton. He beat Joe Biden. Oh, no, sorry, Joe Biden beat him in the basement campaign, and then he beat Harris. So, the Dems have to field good nominees again, not since Obama.
But what does Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris have in common, right? They're both women, and it goes right back to the point that America is still a sexist, misogynistic
I think maybe
country.
Klobuchar or someone or Whitmer could have beaten Trump. I don't know. I don't buy it. I think
All right.
you see Democratic female
getting
senators
sidetracked
winning
on the
tough
hypotheticals,
Senate races. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
But Michael, thank you for
Jackie
stepping
Rosen's
in.
good.
We'll do another one of our lives soon. Thank you for stepping in during our tech things.
Yeah,
Always good
fun.
chatting with you.
Always nice.
Yeah.
So Ross, thank you for bearing with us during the tech stuff.
Yeah. No, it's fun.
So I wanted to ask you, I appreciated the kind of twilight of the MAGA thing and this notion of movement peaking. One thing you said in there, I think really struck me, which I've been feeling also, which is that it's interesting to think about why we're getting a version of Trump's populist authoritarianism that is so willfully unpopular, right? You could imagine there's a litany of things you could imagine him focusing on exclusively that would be terrible and dictatorial and unconstitutional, but really popular and
Yeah, definitely.
really feel good. You could mail people checks. He could focus on building bridges and put his name on them, in a way that impounds congressional money. Any number of things he could do,
or even immigration in a way that was cruel but popular. Like a really aggressive deportation regime, which Obama pursued as well. I mean, yeah, there are ways to do it that he's not doing it.
So why do you think we didn't get? I mean, I'm grateful in a way we didn't get that version, but why do you think we've gotten a version in which Trump has so weakened himself, as you say, peaked politically, gone after his own supporters' portfolios with the tariffs, gone after their veterans' benefits, gone after right now, Medicaid, which is basically the force holding together rural healthcare in red states. Why do you think we got that version?
Because I think we forget, Trump is not surrounded by the best and brightest. He's not the best or the brightest. He's an extremely talented politician. He is in the top pantheon of great performers of all time. He really is. Can't argue that. But I go back to George W. Bush. George W. Bush did many authoritarian things, but he had a popular mandate from 9/11. He used it to destroy the rest of the world. But people wanted a lot of the Bush authoritarianism at the time, the surveillance state. The left resisted, but broadly it was popular. Bush was a pretty good politician, and he was surrounded by very bright and very terrible people, right? Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz. You go down the list, right? These it's not the Trump White House. It's the Trump White House is Stephen Miller, who's second-rate intellectuals, 39-year-old nativist wacko from California. Turn against his left-leaning parents and some sort of angry nativist rage they never got over. You've got a cycling in of a lot of different aides. There's Bannon's always hovering, and from the outside, you got Musk in now. I mean, there's always just these, interlocutors coming in and out, right? So there's always chaos around Trump. And so when there's chaos, it's more organized in the first term. This term's more destructive and it's more competent than the first term. But, I think you have to remember, the bar is low, right? I mean, Trump, people were not excited or giving him credit politically that he got his nominees through the Senate. I mean that's bare basics. Every president gets their nominees confirmed by the Senate. It's not that difficult. So I just think if you look at Donald Trump, he's doing great damage to the country. I'm not arguing that one bit. What I'm saying is it could be a lot worse easily, and a lot of the damage
if
he's
there
doing
was competence.
yes, if there was competence and they knew what to focus on, and they also knew how to really please the people who voted for him, right? And you're talking about, this election swung on a lot of voters who were down on the Democrats. They were upset about inflation. They're upset about the economy. They're upset about immigration. And they decide to give Trump another shot, right? There's the MAGA base, but they're not a majority of the country, are really close. I mean, you could say it's like 30%, whatever. But there's a lot of other people who really bought into Trump again, or at least like, you know what? It's Trump or the Democrats. It's Trump and Harris, Biden. I don't like that my interest rate went up. I don't like that my cost of living is getting tough. I'm going to give this guy a shot and see what he can do. And Trump is doing nothing for those people. And not only that, I mean, he's actively damaging their prospects. I mean, a lot of people depend on the federal government. That's something Republicans, despite their insistence otherwise, are learning the hard way, that a lot of red states need Medicaid, and a lot of government facilities and agencies are in rural areas, politically moderate areas. They're not all just in New York City and DC. They're all over the country. And, a smart politician would know that. This isn't rocket science, but I don't think he is that savvy. I think he has instincts that are good. Trump has certain instincts, but I'm just not impressed by the people around him. I mean, what other Republican now who is president would just let Elon Musk run the government for 3
Yeah,
months?
and that's what's been so
It's
puzzling.
stupid. It's
And I
stupid.
have tried to, as a matter of personal
Stupid.
mental health, tried to think about this as a weird gift of this. I will say, I don't know if you've spent time in any of these other countries that have been living through this kind of experience. The country I know best is a little bit analogous is India, and
Mhm,
Narendra Modi's India is like what this would look like if the popularity level was doubled. And I mean that
mhm.
pretty close to literally. If the entire educated elite was for it, which it is absolutely not in this country, obviously. If the leader, at least there's no real big evidence that the leader is like going around the world trying to make corrupt deals, which, by the way, like all Indian leaders in the past, we're much more likely to do. But this authoritarian leader is like not really seen as doing that kind of stuff. That is that, and where it feels like in India now, 80% of the country has sort of adopted the cultural frame of a Hindu nationalist future. And like the dinner party talk is now in that vein. Like the whole society has mobilized around this project. And when you see that in India, you think, okay, we're not anywhere near that kind of version of this because of the profound personal limitations of this person. Not it's not the only reason. Our system has some resiliences here, but it's a it is a modest silver lining, or maybe a big silver lining. I want to
Oh,
ask you, so
for
you are
sure.
someone who works across media forms,
Mhm.
as am I, but I think you work across an even broader array. So you do fiction, you do nonfiction, you do novels, you're on Substack with your own Substack, Political Currents, but also this Metropolitan Review, which is the kind of literary new age literary journal for a kind of new media era. You also write for places like the New York Magazine and the New York Times. So you're sort of, all of it right now. I'm curious how you see the breadth of the media right now responding to this moment, performing in this moment. Given
Yeah.
that you get to kind of dip into an independent space when you want to, you get to write something for New York Magazine or the New York Times when you want to. How do you think of this kind of more complicated ecosystem of media meeting this moment or not meeting this moment right now?
In terms of Trump, I mean, I think it's very mixed. I mean, you see big television stations, being cowed, right? Being skittish in a way that is upsetting. I don't think they should be skittish. I think they have a lot less to fear than they think they do. At the same time, I think a lot of traditional media has been very resilient. The New York Times isn't pulling punches. Even the Washington Post, despite being owned by Bezos, I mean, their traditional reporting, obviously they've had this whole strange like op-ed mess with forcing columnists out and trying to become some sort of Wall Street Journal-esque opinion page, but dumber. So I think the Wall Street Journal is a smart publication. But the reporters are good. I mean, you pick up the Washington Post, and there's a lot of good reporting in the Trump administration, a lot of good reporting in the New York Times, a lot of good reporting in the Associated Press. I mean, the reason, because a lot of the left is angry at the media too, but the reason you're angry and know things about what Trump is doing is because of the traditional media, right? When we complain about Doge, how dare they do this? How dare they cut this program? Well, that stuff is being reported by living human journalists. This isn't bots shooting it into the ether. So, I think overall the media ecosystem is responding. You have so much independent media now. Obviously, Substack is a great place for all kinds of news and coverage. More opinion than reported. I'm hoping to see more reporting on Substack in the years to come. But in general, there's plenty of pushback. I mean, there's plenty of tough reporting. I don't think in real, as you were saying, in like real authoritarian states, you have a strong figure who is popular with the culture aligned behind them, and they're able to successfully cow a wide range of institutions, right? And you've seen under Trump, it's been very mixed. Trump is cowing some law firms, other law firms are fighting back. Trump cows Columbia, other universities look up and go, wait a second, Columbia looks awful. This is a PR disaster. Why should we bend the knee to Trump? And Harvard's like, yeah, we're not going to bend the knee to Trump. Like, come at us, right? I mean, this isn't an authoritarian country. Actually, if it was, we couldn't have this Substack live. There'd be someone at our door, or there'd be like profound cultural pressure to really censor yourself. And that's not really true. Now there's a lot of problems with the way Trump is violating civil liberties in the First Amendment. I've written a lot about his attacks on academic freedom. I was very distressed to see what happened with Columbia. I think it's an embarrassment and a travesty. But you're seeing pushback too, and I think in media as well. For every CBS or other network that capitulates to Trump out of fear of being sued, there are others that are earning their keep, and those are the smarter ones. Like, I think it's good business not to just be blindly resistance like term one. I think the media really went overboard on resistance branding and in treating every Trump micro controversy as this world annihilating endeavor. But, I think focusing on the substance is great. I think the Doge reporting is great. Focusing on Medicaid cuts. With Trump, it's the same thing that's been true since 2017. Watch what he does, not what he says. He says a lot of things. He will follow through in some things he says, some he will not. But what is his federal government doing? And I think on that note, I've been pleased with how most reporters have treated that. I think we know a lot about Trump's damage because of traditional reporting.
Out of parochial interest, I want to ask you briefly about the New York City mayoral race. You wrote a book about Andrew Cuomo, who is, I guess, a front runner in this mayoral race. You also ran for state senate yourself a couple years ago, and Zoran Mamdani, who's probably the most significant challenger to Cuomo in this race, managed your campaign, if I'm
Yes, he
not
did.
mistaken.
You're correct.
So you're kind of at the center of this race in a funny way. Um, I'm just curious how you see the race, what you think it means. 8 years after the Me Too movement, broke out, that Andrew Cuomo is in the position he is, and this very progressive city. What you make of the fact that someone who wants free buses and public grocery stores and is a democratic socialist is in the position he's in this race. What do you make of those two figures right now?
It's both a very fascinating mayoral race and one that's a bit static right now. So, Cuomo, obviously he resigned in 2021 in disgrace, accused of sexual harassment. He's back now and running again. I think the Me Too era has passed, and that is just a fact currently, and that Cuomo has paid no political price in running again. He has not run a good campaign. He's actually been screwing up his campaign finance paperwork, and he just qualified for the public matching fund system, though he should have a long time ago. but he's got a lot of powerful interests behind him, and there's been a super PAC pounding the airwaves for months. And it's a
Is
very
there any
weird race.
evidence that women are holding back from supporting him because of Me Too?
Not much as of now. I mean, we'll see closer to the primary is June 24th. Like we'll know when the election comes in. But as of now, there's not much. I think Cuomo is persevering on that front. And it's a very strange race, right? Because Eric Adams is the incumbent, but he was indicted last year. Trump got that indictment dropped, but Adams is deeply unpopular, so he's actually not even running the Democratic primary. He's running as an independent. He is highly unlikely to win. So the primary now is Cuomo, who's the overwhelming frontrunner since he's been governor for over a decade, against the field that outside of Zoran, I would say, is not very strong. Zoran's very talented. He's also 33. So he's doing extremely well, and his message is resonating. New York has a real leftist, spirit to it, but it's also a big city. There are leftist neighborhoods, and there are very moderate and centrist or conservative neighborhoods. He's a very interesting candidate. No one of South Asian descent has ever run this competitively before in a mayoral race. No one who's Muslim has ever run this competitively in a mayoral race. No one who's an avowed socialist has ever run this competitively in a mayoral race. So for Zoran, I mean, it really is uncharted territory. Cuomo-like candidates, not governors descending to mayor, but institutional candidates with great amounts of name recognition, have run for office before. What Cuomo is doing in terms of the coalition he's building is far from unprecedented. Zoran is trying something new, and he's doing well. He's still trailing Cuomo. It's going to be hard to overtake Cuomo. I mean, the key to the race really is for the other candidates to do better. Right now, it's Cuomo polling at roughly 40%, Zoran in like the 20s, which is very, very good for a first-time candidate, and the rest of the field is like really in the single digits to low double. I think one candidate to keep your eye on is the council speaker, Adrienne Adams. Her problem is she got in very late, so she's still raising money and trying to qualify for matching funds. I think had she been in the race earlier, she would have presented an interesting alternative to Cuomo and Zoran. But it's a ranked choice voting elections. That's also the wild card in New York City. You can pick up to 5 candidates on your ballot. It does reward cross endorsements. It does reward candidates working together. There is a don't rank Cuomo movement, but the reality is the anti-Cuomo forces are very underfunded. I don't think they're terribly organized, to be honest, and they're underfunded. Whereas Cuomo's got a super PAC that has raised millions and has just been on the airwaves for over a month now, and that's hard to beat. Plus his record as governor, coming off of Eric Adams, there are a lot of people who just want like an executive back. And I think Cuomo was not a great executive, but he was an executive. And so he is selling that to the city. I think he's the heavy favorite, but we're going to see what happens in June 24th. There's still some time left for the race to change a bit, but he certainly is the heavy favorite.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about your new novel out called Glass Century. Are you there? Uh-oh, what's happening
Oh,
here?
yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Okay.
I want to ask you about your new novel that just came out, Glass Century. It's getting rave reviews all over the place, and so congratulations on it. It begins in
Thank you.
1970s New York, against the kind of backdrop of the rise of Donald Trump. It doesn't explicitly focus on him, and it hits a lot of the major historical points of the city's experience of the 20th century. Um, so, I want to ask you, people often ask me, people who don't know me well, are like, why don't you also do fiction? And my answer to that is, I feel like it's a bunch of people who write fiction well, and I feel most of them don't necessarily know the craft of reporting. I know the craft of reporting. It's quite difficult to do evidence-based reporting. People don't actually understand what we do or how we obsess over the transcripts and accuracy of things and triple check things and whatever. I feel like I know how to do that. There's not a lot of people trained in that. I'm just going to stick to that. I'll leave other people to concoct worlds. Um, I'm curious how you, as someone who does that same thing that I do, also feel it important to be a novelist and create worlds in that way. Do you find it strange to operate in these two modes? I mean, it's a little bit. I mean, I wonder if it's a little bit sort of like being a veterinarian and a like animal slaughterer or something. Where you have to shift into these two kind of different modes of truth, reality, fiction, nonfiction.
Yeah.
Talk about that and tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, it's the book is called Glass Century. It's big, multi-generational family saga spanning from the 1970s to 2020 to the start of the pandemic. It's about a long-running love affair between a married man and a younger woman, but it's also about a family, and it's about the politics of the city and the events of the city. 9/11 is a major part of the book. Donald Trump has a cameo as a young man. It's not a Trump book. It's not one of these books where historical figures parachute in and out, but I felt like you can't tell the story of modern New York and modern America without Donald Trump. And it all starts in the 1970s in New York City. So Trump hovers in, then he goes out. So for the anti-Trump people, you're not reading a book about Trump, I promise you, but he pops in early on. So it's a really fascinating book, I think, and it has a lot of sweep. In terms of fiction and nonfiction, I wish there was less of a wall between the worlds, honestly. I think in the 20th century, it was a lot more common for journalists to write novels. Most of the prominent nonfiction writers, essayists, journalists wrote novels too, whether it's Joan Didion, Jimmy Breslin wrote many novels, Pete Hamill. It was not uncommon to toggle between the modes. Mailer and Vidal did both. So I don't view them as exclusive. Obviously, you are in a different mindset, right? I mean, as a reporter, your fidelity is to that literal truth. You cannot misquote people. You must check and double check your facts. Of course, facts can shift, and we know, even as a reporter, you are making choices in how to portray reality in a certain way. But you have a very particular task in mind. It's very scientific in many ways. It's like a form. You're performing a form of the scientific method. And in fiction, it's an art. You are moving into the realm of imagination. And I believe firmly in the power of the imagination, in the portrayal of human consciousness, which nonfiction can do, but it's a lot tougher, right? I mean, to really get in someone's head, you have to imagine. So for me, I really enjoy writing about how people think, writing about the inner lives of human beings. I enjoy ranging about. I think the novel as the art form is a wonderful art form. It's one that to me is one of the very highest. I believe in it and firmly. And I think as a well-rounded writer, one should be consuming both. I always believe that if you want to be a better writer and a better thinker, you should be reading a range of nonfiction. You should be reading fiction. I think attempt different modes too. I think we as a society have become a bit too specialized. You see it cutting across a range of vocations. You see it in athletics now, or from a young age, if a child is gifted in a sport, their parents push them into only that sport. So the idea that one can go to high school and then play basketball and baseball and football, that sort of has died out. So I think too, with like writing, the nonfiction writer, the journalist thinks, oh, this is all I can do. This is it for me. And I don't think that way. I mean, I've always loved fiction. Fiction was my first love. Nonfiction is also what pays the bills. One can make money writing fiction. There are successful novelists, but generally speaking, it's very hard to make a living off of fiction. Whereas nonfiction, there's a market for it. So there are market imperatives that come into play. My nonfiction is what pays my bills and keeps me from buying, helps me buy groceries and get new pairs of shoes and things like that. But I love fiction tremendously, and I think it's a real way to experience the world in an entirely different manner. And as a writer of fiction, there's a lot of range and beauty, and there are a lot of ways you can explore how people live. And that's very exciting for me. And it's exciting to be able to really, as a reporter, you can get to know a lot of different people and talk to them and do it that way. But, as a novelist, you are unlimited in that sense. You have the truly blank canvas. So for me, it's a great joy. And I, will always care about fiction a tremendous amount.
Well, very happy to have you on to chat. The novel is Glass Century. And also, please check out Ross's Substack here, Political Currents, as well as the Metropolitan Review, which is not a personal project, but a kind of group project, a literary magazine. We'd love to talk about that more in the future. But I
Yeah.
love the ways you're working across some of these lines, and great to chat with you. And come back and chat with us again soon.
Well, thank you. You're a tremendous writer and public intellectual, so very honored to be part of this, and
Oh, well,
hope
thank
to
you
be
for
on
saying
again.
that. Really
Yeah.
delighted to have you on. All right.
Yes.
Thanks everyone for
Bye.
watching.